Tired of asking why? Welcome to the Unresolved Life podcast, where we are answering life's most difficult questions. Now, here's your host, Teresa Blaze.
Welcome to the Unresolved Life podcast. I'm Teresa Blaze, and today I've got a really cool guest. And I guess 3 times the charm, because we've tried to record this one twice already, but it just means we're going to have even better content the 3rd time around, right? Today, I've got with me Mr. Rob Decker, and as you know, this show is about answering unresolved issues, and in his story, I think you'll find a whole lot of unresolved issues, and I think you'll find how God stepped in and met him. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm glad that we're doing this. I'm glad that I've had an opportunity to get to know you guys. You guys are wonderful.
Well, I'm glad to have you on board. Can you tell us kind of how you came to be here and a little bit about your background and so on and so forth?
It always starts with my mom. You know, my mom, she is the great incubator of me, and she had me at a very young age. She was actually instructed or, asked to abort me as a child. My mom came from a really tough upbringing herself. She was the oldest of 5. She was raped and beaten and neglected and kicked out on the street and put in foster homes. And, so a lot of me started with my mom. When I was born, over the next few months, my mom met a man that would eventually be called my dad, and they had a kid together, had my sister. And through growing up, there was a lot of favoritism, a lot of violence, a lot of arguing, domestic disputes, drinking, drugs, smoking. There was a lot of dysfunction in the home. And I'm sure that, that's common in a lot of homes, a lot of dysfunction. No one's perfect. No family's perfect. But, my mom and dad, they didn't really see eye to eye when it came to parenting or anything of the sorts. Wasn't really raised in a religious household. I know that my mom was part of the Catholic faith, but she never really preached it to us. She never really put God or Jesus on us for anything. I don't think my dad was religious at all. So that's not something that was ever taught to us. I do remember my first experience of having a God moment is when I came home from school in kindergarten, and it was a day that I found out that my dad wasn't my biological father, and came home with a certification that had his last name on it. And his mom, or my grandmother, wasn't fond of that. I wasn't one of them. So she had my father remove my last name, and then I was given my mother's maiden name, which was perfectly fine with me. It's just another way for my mom and I to connect. And we have a pretty deep connection, especially now that I have the Lord. When I found all that information out, that he wasn't my real father, that my sister wasn't my full-blooded sister, I remember walking out of the house that day, and I remember something telling me that everything was going to be okay because God was my father.
Did you have any kind of context or any kind of framework in which to go to process that statement?
No, in all honesty, I do recall the statement, but I don't ever recall being brought up in any type of faith or religion. Certain things stick with you throughout your life, and that was just one of those things that had stuck with me. But we didn't really have any schooling on any of that stuff. It just wasn't preached in our home.
So what happened after this incident?
Well, you're talking about years of stuff in the making. So, over the years, my parents grew further apart. The relationship between my sister and I was a lot more dysfunctional because of who my mom was and who her dad was, and, the favoritism and then all the stuff that we witnessed within the house. And eventually my sister and I started drifting off and finding our group of friends that were, and I'm not going to say all my friends were bad, because they weren't. Like, there were some of these guys were pretty awesome, but you start following the trouble, you start drinking and doing drugs. And so when I was in high school, there was a lot of that going on. I remember going to class drunk. Me and my buddy were drinking some orange juice and vodka in class. And, then we'd go, during our breaks to go smoke marijuana. And then eventually that stuff led into doing acid and shrooms and eventually cocaine. As everything drifted in the household, the conflict between my dad and I, and him not being my real father, and him being so strict with me, and him not treating me as fair as he treated my sister, like all that stuff really started to compound on top of each other. And then my mom, she didn't really want me around because she saw the relationship between my dad and I, and she just didn't want that for me. So a lot of the times she just didn't want me home. As a young guy, you don't understand those things, but as an adult, I understood that she was just trying to protect me any way she could. And being in the house wasn't the best thing for me. And in school, like I didn't care about my grades. My family didn't care about my grades. My sister dropped out of middle school, and so I eventually dropped out of high school. I made it through most of it, but I didn't pay attention. I didn't do well. I was getting caught up in the drugs, the alcohol, the trouble. I ended up serving some time in a juvenile center a couple times in high school, and constantly was getting in fights and having shotguns pulled out on me, and it was outrageous, and it just got worse over time. And I was fortunate enough to meet some people when I went to high school that really took to me. My best friend and his family, they loved me. They cared for me. They tried to invite me in their home and keep me there. They tried to adopt me, but it was not something that my parents were going to allow to happen, even though they were dysfunctional and they were drinking and using drugs. And, they just didn't want to part with me, I suppose. And things just started to get worse in my 20s.
During your high school experience and, during the partying, and you said that you really weren't wanted at home. So was your seeking of drugs and the partying and the fights, was that maybe to overcome, because that had to have brought a sense of rejection, I would think, that maybe you weren't wanted?
Well, yeah, naturally. I felt like I was black sheeped at an early age, so the drugs and the alcohol, it all started in good, innocent fun, right? As it does. But, I started to use it to medicate, and it is, I didn't have value for myself. I had no self-worth for myself. I didn't have true confidence. I was fortunate enough to look a certain way. Like I had a certain look that was pleasing. So I was able to get away with that for a while. And I used that as a false sense of confidence of like, I'm the man and, I get a lot of attention. Plus, like I developed a sense of humor. And so I was able to use the sense of humor and the looks to kind of mask a lot of things to the public. But, I had the inner stuff, the deep stuff that no one could address, the things that I wasn't sharing with people. So what I was doing is I was ingesting the drugs and the alcohol in order to deal with these things. But, bearing all that stuff, just put it deeper inside, made it grow bigger. I was just medicating. I wasn't fixing anything. And then I was creating an addiction on top of it, right? Like now it's just like I crave this stuff. I was looking forward to doing this stuff. My day wasn't the same unless I was ingesting something. So yes.
So in your 20s, you get out of high school or you drop out of high school. So at this point, are you still considering God, or do you have any other thoughts around him, or are you just trying to focusing on, I'm going to kill this pain because I don't want to deal with what's going on in me?
Yeah, I think that I always had a perception of God, and it's weird to me because I knew that God existed. Something said that God existed, and for some reason, Jesus was connected to all that, and I understood that he was there. I was living my life. He loved me for who I was. And, I didn't really go out of my way to have a relationship with him. But then again, I didn't have anyone coming to me and be like, hey, this is the way. And even if they did at that time, I don't think I would have listened anyway, because I was just rebellious and wanting to do my own thing. And I didn't really seek God at all. It was much later in my 20s where God became relevant in my life. And it was way later. I was almost 30 years old when he did. And I had a buddy who was a coworker who kept trying to press this God thing into me. And I kept kind of dismissing it. Like I knew what he was saying was probably true, but at the same time, I wasn't ready and willing to give up my lifestyle. I didn't want to become a Christian and lead a boring life and have no excitement, and then have all my friends that are part of a certain environment like reject me. I didn't want any of that stuff. I just wanted God to accept me for who I was.
And how indignant is that if that was your impression of, well, to equate, if I become a Christian, then obviously my life will be boring. The reality is God is anything but boring. Almost condemning of the church, I guess I would say. If that was your actual viewpoint, it just shows we represented him poorly.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I just hadn't met any sound Christians. But here's the truth. Like, my truth is that he came into my life exactly when he was supposed to come to or I went to him. I'm sorry. He was always there. He was always there looking after me. I know that he knew that eventually I would come to him. I have confidence in that. But it's a timing thing. Like, God knows. He knows what type of events. He knows what situation. He knows how to reach you. And so I don't know if anyone really failed me. I mean, the truth is I've been to church on and off for years, and the church will always fail you. I mean, it's full of people that make decisions, right? And they have their own lives. But the gospel and Jesus never failed me. But I had to get to that place where it was just God and I all alone before he could really start working in my heart.
Okay, so you're kind of rejecting the gospel. You're hearing it, but you're not interested. You're doing your thing in your 20s. So what happens from there?
So what happened was I was really getting into cocaine big time, and I was drinking a lot. I mean, I was drinking the big bottle of vodka at night. I mean, there was times I was doing 8 balls of coke by myself at my house. It was just becoming so destructive. And then I was selling steroids and human growth hormone on top of it. So I was making really good money on top of like working and stuff. But this is what I was investing in. This was my investment. And I remember I went to go cash a check at the bank, and the check was from drug money. And I met a young lady there, and her and I hit it off, and we started talking, and we got into a relationship. My whole life, I was always in relationships. I was always seeking something. But what happens is these relationships get more destructive and more dysfunctional, right? Because that's the kind of stimulation you need. It's just like addiction or sin. It's like you're constantly chasing, and a little bit's not good enough anymore. So, I mean, I got into a relationship that was completely dysfunctional and even going into it, like, she had kind of given me a backstory, and I had a sense that maybe she had been molested by her father. I know that she was watching porn at a really young age. So she had her stuff, and she was a lot younger than I was. She was like 20 or 21. I was 28, 29. And so I already knew the kind of baggage that she had, but yet I chose to pursue this young lady. And at the time, I was actually seeing somebody else. So I blew off this girl who was actually a really sweet, nice, caring, giving. She was just a good overall person for this really dysfunctional relationship, because good meant nothing for me, right? It wasn't crazy enough. It wasn't exciting enough. I needed something a lot more on the edge and
right.
And a lot
so
more.
You were bored, and so this lady who came in with all the baggage seemed to fit the mold of.
Oh, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So we started dating, but real quickly things escalated. Things got ugly and hairy, and we were drinking and all sorts of stuff. And eventually we just had to break up because it just became extremely toxic. Well, during that whole breakup is when I finally took my buddy up on his offer. Hey man, I'll go to church with you. I was finally in a place where like I wasn't working. I didn't have a girlfriend. I was drinking and using all the time. Other than working out, I had pretty much nothing else going on for me. I was actually hopping couches and sleeping at different friends' houses and stuff like that. And so I took my buddy on his offer, and I headed to a men's Bible study. And in that men's Bible study, it was a great experience. These guys prayed over me. They were very welcoming. We got into the Bibles. Some of the stuff made sense. In the midst of all of it, like, I'm over here shaking and getting hot and sweaty in an air-conditioned room. It's like all these things are going on with me that I've never experienced before. Having great peace, in the midst of this group.
Now, were the people at this study, and was the friend that actually led you to the study, were they aware of your drugs and the addictions and all the baggage that you brought in?
Oh, my buddy knew. My buddy knew. He knew. I shared the stories with him. He knew, like, we would be working together, and I'd talk about how I'm going to go do coke and go to the club and get drunk. And this dude, like, he was cool. He never judged me for any of it. Like, he never even tried to get me to quit anything. I think more than anything, he did the right thing, and he tried to lead me to Christ, and he didn't say, well, everything you're doing is wrong. I mean, truth is, Christ is going to do his job. It's like, it's his job to get me off all this junk. It's not my buddy's job to get me off all this junk. It was my buddy's job to lead me into that direction. And he did his job. He did great at it, because here I am today. It was a great experience. But shortly after, I find out that this young lady is now selling her body for money. She's an escort on Craigslist, when you could do that on Craigslist. I decided now that I had God, that I was going to walk back into her life, and then I was going to preach to her, and I was going to be her savior. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not even a good idea ever.
I can imagine that, no, that doesn't work. The whole trying to rescue people out of it when you're barely figuring it out yourself, probably not the best idea.
I just learned how to doggy paddle, and I'm over here trying to swim to Alcatraz, right, in choppy water. So, we ended up started talking to each other again, and, she was heavily involved in what she was doing, and the agreement was, as we started seeing each other, that she'd start breaking all these clients away from her, and she did. And she had this one last client who was taking her out to Hawaii for this big trip. And while she was over there, she was calling me up and talking about how he's so abusive and he's so rude and he's neglectful, but then he's also forcing himself on her. And, once again, it was one of those situations where she didn't outright say certain words, but you knew exactly what she was insinuating. And then she sends a picture of herself to me on the cell phone of a black eye, like this guy just decked her. And it was in those conversations before she came back that she was like, I'm sorry for whatever has happened, and I want to make it right again. And I went back to all that stuff, and she came home and she picked me up from my buddy's house. It was Memorial Day weekend, and we headed out to the liquor store, bought more alcohol, went to her house, and upstairs we started kind of getting into this dialect of, what has happened, what's to come. And it was supposed to get intimate. And the truth is that I just didn't have it. Like I couldn't, get over the stuff we'd already been through, plus the stuff that she had just been through. Plus, like, now I had the God factor. The God factor definitely made a difference. It's so crazy because the God factor made a difference, but leading up to what I did, it almost doesn't make sense. So I go downstairs after this conversation, and I just want to sleep it off. I just want to reboot, and there's a banging at the front door. Well, it's the police department, and they're like, "Open up the door, Mr. Decker. We know you're in there." And I'm like, I'm in full blown utter shock. And she comes downstairs, and I ask her what's going on, and she looks at me and she tells me that I called the cops, and I told the cops that you raped me and that you tried to kill me.
Okay, that's a rather large shift from I want to work things out.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is that as I prayed on it in the hospital, like what was revealed to me was she was rejected by me. The person that she didn't think was going to reject her, rejected her. Now, she could have easily went to the authorities about this other gentleman and said that's what really happened. But here's the thing. She had to save face. She had to save face with him in order for her experiences or her job or occupation, whatever it is, to be exposed, because that's embarrassing for her, I guess. She has to confront all that stuff. So she didn't want all that confronted. And it was easier to put it on me because I was there. I rejected her. Obviously, I hurt her emotionally because of the rejection. And that's what came to me, which eventually led into forgiveness and my healing process. But I looked at her and I was broken and devastated and betrayed. And, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, yeah, I just received the Lord. But in that moment, it was over for me. It was really over for me. And I always felt like I was going to die young. It was something that was pressed into me as a young man, and it carried me through. And hence all the drugs and the alcohol and the days of I wish that I didn't wake up and that I had passed on and all that kind of stuff. And, I didn't understand much, but I just looked at her and I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. It's over. It's done. I'm finished. And I turned around and I ran headfirst for a closed window, jumped headfirst out of this window. And I remember the glass breaking. And it was a 3-story loft. On my way down, my foot clipped an awning, changed my fall. My ultimate goal was to break my neck and kill myself. That was the goal. But in the midst of the fall, everything changed. I landed on my left arm and I completely shattered it. Broke my right wrist because I guess I tried to catch myself. My left lung collapsed from the impact. And then my lower back broke. It severed the vertebrae. So once I hit the ground, I was immobile. I had no Well, I was feeling, I felt the most immense pain ever known to mankind, at least for me. And I could hardly breathe, right? Because I collapsed my lung. It was absolutely insane. I don't know how I didn't snap the spinal column or the cord, but I did it. I laid there and I look up at the window and I asked God, why? Why did you let me live? Came the police and the ambulance and getting me on the gurney and sending me to the hospital. And, it was like an 8, 9, 10 hour surgery. And I woke up the next morning and I had an external fixator, which is all the metal bars that come out of your arm with the screws, and so they can set everything to line up with each other. I had a cast on my right arm. I had a back brace on. I had tubes coming out of my neck. I was hooked up to an oxygen machine. Here come the police. Police walk in like, Mr. Decker, you're under arrest for attempted murder and rape. And then they put the handcuffs on me right there on the bed. Like, I'm already a show, right? I'm in a different place. I'm medicated. I'm in pain. I'm all broken up. I'm not going anywhere, right? And here they come and slapping some charges on me. That was a pretty insane experience, and it didn't look like I was going to walk for sure. I remember one of the doctors or nurses mentioning that, this guy's not walking due to the severe damage that was done. So as the day went on, I remember the cop, he had to watch me. I was on 24-hour surveillance. And I remember the cop, he was just giving me a hard time. Like, he's reading the report, he's messing with his cell phone. He's pretty upset that he has to be there to babysit me. He's giving me a hard time and talking about how, he's reading the report and it doesn't look good for me, or I'm such a bad guy. And I'm over here like, man, and I'm breaking down. I'm starting to cry. And I'm looking at him like, you know what, officer, I've made some pretty bad choices in my life, but this isn't one of them. If anything, I cared about her and I tried my best to show that, and maybe I wasn't good at that. Nurse comes in to quiet me down, and I look up and there she is. She's there with her sister. She's all disguised in her sunglasses and paperwork and hairstyle.
Wait a minute. The same girl that accuses you of rape and murder shows up in the hospital?
Correct. As bad as the cop was giving it to me, and maybe he thought I was guilty. I don't know. I don't know. But he looks up at me and he says, is that who I think it is? And I just, I agree with him, and he escorts her out. And, he's just like, for someone who'd been through all that just does not make sense to me. That day passed, and I remember laying there talking to God, not knowing what's going to happen. And I just remember as I was speaking to him, I just had this peaceful feeling come over my body. And I heard these words. And keep in mind that you're in a hospital. It's well lit. There's nurses, there's doctors, there's a police officer, there's TVs, there's intercoms, there's medication machines, there's oxygen machines. The hospital is a very noisy, busy place. And, here I am laying, and all of a sudden, like, things are dimming down and getting quiet and peaceful. And the pain is virtually like removed from me for a moment's time. And I just hear this voice. I hear this still, soft, but clear voice say to me, the charges will be dropped, your bills will be paid, and you will walk again. I fall off into a sleep or a vision of me playing soccer. And I woke up and, everything was chaotic again. Everything was noisy. Everything was crazy. A couple days pass after that, and the police come up. They come up to the room, and they're like, Mr. Decker, we're dropping all charges. They took my fingerprints. You're no longer incarcerated. You're no longer under arrest, and we wish the best of luck to you. And they were pretty nice guys. Those guys were pretty nice, considering someone that I came across. What happened was that small, still voice who had given me peace and quiet and relieve my pain, like that voice, I was just like, wow, Lord, it's like, and it came to pass. Here's something crazy though. A few weeks after, I was in the hospital for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks or something like that. And, I'm at home and the police show up. The same police that actually threw the cuffs on me. It was a different set of cops that took the cuffs off, but the same set of cops that arrest me initially show up to my mom's house where I'd happen to be staying after I got released. They come up there and, they're starting to grill me about like me trying to kill her and me trying to rape her. And then the other cop, there was 2 of them. They weren't playing good cop, bad cop. They were playing mean cop and a lot meaner cop, right? And the other cop's like, well, we know that you weren't trying to take your life, that you were just running from the police. And I explained to the cop, I said, well, I don't know if you knew this, sir, but she was an escort. She was selling her body for money. Because what they did is they presented me with information or documentation of her being physically assaulted sexually. And I explained to them, I said, hey, this is who she is, what she's done, what she came out of. And the only thing the detective could say was, wow, maybe she didn't tell us that because she was really embarrassed. And I was like, man, yeah, but this is my freedom, right? These are serious charges. And as far as the other cop's concerned, it's like, yeah, man, yeah, definitely wasn't trying to run from the cops, right? Like I was definitely trying to take you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what was going on in my head. And it was just kind of a weak attempt at trying to create something. I don't know. I ended up having to deal with that. And that was a little insult to injury, but it's okay. They left. I'm good. Back to the hospital. While I was in the hospital healing, I remember my mom showing up. So now that the police are gone, I can actually have visitors. And so my mom shows up and she's bawling her eyes out. Like my mom's the doctors had just told her that I'm never going to walk again. And I see it in her face. Like I know what they just told her. So she comes in the room and we have that conversation about me not walking again. And the doctor's telling her that. And she looks at me and I know that she meant to say this with the purest of intentions and the best of hearts. But she was like, I just wish it had all ended for you that day. My mom wanted me to pass that day because she didn't want to see me suffer anymore. Those were her words. I don't want to see you suffer in this life anymore. And I understood that and I was okay with that. I really felt like that was her way of showing love to me because I knew what she came out of and the pain and the suffering that she's had her whole life and all the dysfunction. And now it's been carried on to her oldest kid, her son. And I understood and I was okay with it. And, the nurses come in the room, 2 of them. They're like, Mr. Decker, we're going to try to get you up today. And I knew for a fact it just wasn't going to happen. I knew I was in too much pain. I couldn't even sit up on the bed without having just the craziest of pain. And I was on a few different type of medication. I know I was on a morphine drip at the time. And what came over me is like, I got to do this for my mom. I got to give her some hope. I got to show her that I'm okay. I'm here for a reason. I'm confident that I'm here for a reason. The small, still voice said, hey, you will walk again. I don't know how it's going down, but it's got to go down. And that small, still voice was God. And in that whole kind of trying to pump myself up to get going, I thought about Christ on the cross. I thought about him carrying the cross. I thought about the movie Passion of Christ, which gave me a visual of what he went through. I went back to remembrance of what I read in Isaiah 53 on the beating that he took, that he was so unrecognizable that you didn't even know who he was anymore. So I took those thoughts and I used that thought as those thoughts and visions as this is what's going to get me out of bed if I'm going to get up out of bed. And so I took all that and on the count of 3, I get up. And I squeal. I mean, it was a horrible, it probably hurt just as much as when I hit the ground, I guess. And, and the nurses came over and they stuck me with medication in my tubes and they set me back down. They're like, he's out for the count. And, I think a week or 2 later, the doctors decided to perform another surgery on me. They were able to do so. And when they did, I was able to drag my foot. So, after dragging my foot, I really knew that I was going to walk again because I'm like, well, the next step is walking and then running and then working out. My mind was already set in that direction. It's like, well, this is what's going to happen for my life. And so I started moving again. I was able to get up and move again. So, hey, voice promise number 2, came to pass and I started walking and, now I don't take medication and I play softball and basketball. I run, I jump, I slide, I dive. I lift weights, I deadlift, I squat, I bench. You would never for a second think that there was absolutely anything wrong with me. I've been healed. I have a lot of hardware. I have lots and lots of millions millions of dollars of hardware and surgeries and hospital stays. But even with that, the state of California ended up covering all that stuff. So it all came to pass. And yeah, you know, and you know, in that whole process, you know, I'm struggling with the pain pills now and the drinking and trying to medicate and feel better. And I prayed and I read and I prayed, and like, Lord, you're going to have to deliver me from the alcohol. You're going to have to deliver me from these pills. You're going to have to get me out of certain environments. Like, I have to completely lean on you. And I truly believe in deliverance. I believe that God can step in and he can either immediately rip something out of your life and boom, it's over in a second, or he'll walk you through the process so that you can learn other things, so that you can grow in him. And then it's completely removed. So, you know, his processes are unlike anything else, right? There's no script for any of that kind of stuff. There's no program for that stuff for me. This is my experience. I heavily believe in his redemptive abilities and deliverance and all that kind of stuff. And reality is, eventually I got off all 6 medications that I was on. I quit drinking like 5 years ago. He used a situation in my life that freed me from alcohol, where I struggled because I craved it, but I have not craved it since. I don't even like the idea of it when it comes to me. And so that was removed. Yeah, it's crazy, but you know, I believe in it. And you know, I continued to read and pray, and I would, you know, backslide a little bit, but it was a process. It was a process. And in that process of backsliding and falling flat on my face and still feeling pain, and you know, I understand his grace and I understand his teaching ways. He just knew what it was going to take.
I'm reminded of the passage in 1st or 2nd Corinthians where Paul was talking about the thorn of the flesh, and God responds, "My grace is sufficient for you." You know, I have a lot of different agreements on some of the stuff you were saying. You know, I have my own struggles with addictions. You know, I was heavily addicted to gaming, and I used it to medicate because everything around me was just going nuts and going crazy. The interesting thing with me is that he didn't deal with the actual addiction right away. He dealt with the underlying issues before we even touched that.
Yes. So that's what it is. He knew what inside of me was leading to the medication portion of it. He wanted to work the other stuff. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's what it was. He wanted to strip me of confusion, and he wanted to pour love into my heart and into my life and understanding. A lot of times we do things because we're confused. He wanted to address my anger, and that anger came from the confusion, right? Like, and I truly, wholly believe in that. I believe that when God starts exposing those things and showing it to you and giving you an understanding, well, the addictions are nothing anymore, because you're like, I know why I do what I do. I know there's going to be people out there that say, well, there's a chemical connection and all this stuff. And you know what? I'm sure there is. But I'll tell you this. He is the great physician, and he was able to strip those things. Unfortunately, you'll have, individuals in our faith that don't believe that. They believe for whatever reason there needs to be additional groups or literature that needs to be added on to the whole situation. I'm not saying that I can pray over you right now in this moment, everything's gonna be cured. That's between you and God. You know, it's just tough, because I know that people in our camp, they don't just solely lean on Christ and Christ alone. And the truth is that Christ dies in vain if you believe that you need to outsource your addictions and your problems and your issues. I'll probably get a little bit of heat for this, but it's the truth. Christ and Christ alone can do these things. That's what he came to do, right? He has the power that he heals. It's what he does. And a lot of this stuff, like you were saying, it's the emotional stuff that led into the other stuff. So when you can attack the emotional stuff, you know, all that other stuff starts to vacate.
When I was neck deep in the addiction, and I mean, I was neck deep and things were just blowing up around me. And I had an individual at the church, he was a pastor of the church that I attended, and rather than deal with the underlying issues because he didn't see them, he came after me over the symptom. And you don't need to be gaming. It's ungodly. You can't do this. Yada, yada, yada. And that coming after me over the symptom just drove me deeper into it, because I was like, dude, you have no clue what I'm dealing with. Back off.
And I love that you brought that up, because it's the same thing with my buddy. My buddy, instead of grilling me for doing drugs and alcohol, he was leading me to Christ. He was leading me to the answer. That's exactly what he was doing. He wasn't worried about the other stuff. At least that's not what was on his heart. His heart was like, dude, I have the answer. It's not quitting drinking and quitting drugs isn't the answer. It's you're godless. You're Christless. That's the true issue, right? You're trying to fill yourself with things that only the Holy Ghost can fill you with, right? The only thing Christ can fill you with, right? Our Father. That alone is what's going to spare you from all this other stuff.
I know, for me, it was like, cause things had just gone crazy and I completely walked away from God. I was just not interested. So as I hear this story, what I hear is a man who was completely taken captive by the enemy, but whom God said, you know what? No, this one is mine. This one is mine. And I am gonna ransom everything to get him back. And guess what? He will do that for every single person that is listening today. If you do not know Christ, he will step in and he'll go, no, I don't, I'm not so much interested in the issues of your life. I'm interested in your heart.
Yes. Right. It's a heart issue. It's always a heart issue, right?
Do you have anything else that you would like to offer our audience?
I have created my own website. So the whole podcast and speaking and all that kind of stuff, this is all new for me. It's just kind of the door and the direction that the Lord had opened and shown me. So I have a bunch of podcasts. I have a couple articles that was written about me. I have a video of the window that I jumped out of. I have CBN, the 700 Club came out and they did this stellar 6-minute video. It actually took 6 hours to make the video. It was like 3 hours of testimony and 3 hours of working out. So there was a lot of work that was put into the 6 minutes, but it's a very, very powerful video. If you go to my website, robdeckerspeaks.com, you can click on anything that I've been a part of. Right now it's very young. There's a lot of podcasts on there. Like I said, there's the articles. I got a couple of those, the videos, but it also has my Facebook and my Instagram. And I'm always posting about nutrition. I'm a fitness trainer. That's my day job. I'm a fitness trainer. I try to make a positive impact on people, not only with my faith, but with my knowledge of health, nutrition, and fitness. I believe that overall we should take care of ourselves. God gave me my body back. I'm very grateful for this body. I only have one, so I do my best to take care of it. And I share that through my social media and my webpage. So it's just a place that you guys can go and check everything out. And eventually I want to lead on to other things, but right now that's what it is. And hopefully I'll have some more speaking arrangements. I know that I'm supposed to be doing Celebrate Recovery here within the next month. My buddy runs it in Los Angeles. And so I'm going to go speak to a bunch of folks that have been sober. They're struggling to stay sober and share a lot of what I shared with you today. So robdeckerspeaks.com. You can always get a hold of me through that site as well. There's a place where you can ask me questions. I'll pray for you, share thoughts. Whatever.
Thank you so much for being a voice that God is able.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that it is my responsibility to take my experiences after leading such a selfish life. I was very selfish my whole life. Still struggle with it in some areas sometimes, but I just want to give back. I want to be a light for the kingdom. I want people to understand that God's love is real. A lot of people still show up to church and they don't get that message, right? He's real. These are real things that we've been through, as his children, the false accusations, the suicide attempts, the drug addiction. I was actually molested when I was younger as well. It's all these things. I know that I can touch a lot of people with this story, and it's his goodness. It's all his goodness. Really, bad things happen to people. That's just the world we live in. No, I hold nothing against the Lord. I know that everything bad that has ever come upon me has been turned around for his glory. And I know that, and I'm with that. And if I struggle in the future, that's fine. You know what? Because he'll be there. There's lessons to be learned. He will be glorified in all of it.
You've been listening to the Unresolved Life podcast. To catch all our past shows, go to unresolved.life. That's unresolved.life.